Today I'm going to be showing you my ANIMAR EDH deck. I've been building it since 2015, so that's 8 years. ANIMAR first came out in 2011, but I started building this deck in 2015. I think Animar still has a lot of potential, but I have to warn you, this deck is not what I would consider CEDH. If you wanted to make it more competitive, you could include more of the infinite combos for starters. I do play Forgotten Ancient in this deck, which is a one card infinite combo, but there are other combo pieces, two that I'll mention being Cloudstone Curio and Palancron. If you were to run these, you might get a lot of hate at your table for that. It would bring the power level of the deck up. This particular build is meant more as a casual deck, but it is designed to pop off around turn 4 or 5. And at that point, you should start being able to cast big drops like Eldrazi. I run Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, and Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, as well as Artisan of Kozilek. These creatures are basically free because, let's review, Animar's three abilities: one pro white, pro black, and we are going to take advantage of those protection abilities. And whenever you cast a creature spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on Animar. For each +1/+1 counter on Animar, creature spells cost one colorless less to cast. It does not reduce to 0 creatures that have colored mana in their cost, but it does reduce to 0 creatures like Solemn Simulacrum, who only has colorless in their mana cost. Ancestral Statue, the way this combo works, once you have 3 counters on Animar, you can play Ancestral Statue. Using Ancestral Statue's ability, you can bounce Ancestral Statue back to your hand and play it again for free because its cost is 4, and Animar now has 4 counters. And with this, you can get infinite counters on Animar by infinitely bouncing Ancestral Statue back to your hand. This is not a pure creature build. In fact, let's take a look at it by type. There are 41 creatures, but there are a few enchantments in particular. And you can see this slice here, 41 creatures plus Animar, that's 42. 34 lands, and a few, a smattering of other cards. And most of the card costs, 57 symbols or 66%, are green, but I include a little bit of over-representation of red and blue mana just to ensure that we are able to cast Animar. And you can see the breakdown by CMC. We peak at 2. The average CMC is 3.44. So it's a pretty fast deck, and in fact I call it a turbo Animar deck because it does try to ramp up to those big creatures very quickly. As I said, we make use of protection. We also run Sword of Fire and Ice and Sword of Truth and Justice. They both give Animar Pro Blue, which makes Animar nearly impossible to target with a removal spell. There might be a few red spells, but those are blocked as well by Sword of Fire and Ice. We also run the Ozolith. This is a newer card. I believe it was printed in Ikoria. And whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. Then, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if there are counters on the Ozlith, you can move all of the counters onto target creature. Basically, if Animar gets killed with a board wipe or something else that is able to target it, you can move all of the counters onto the Ozlith, and when you cast Animar again at the beginning of combat, all of the counters go back on Animar. So you don't lose the progress. Because a problem I've had with this deck when Animar dies to removal in a semi competitive pod, um, I have to ramp up from the beginning, and killing the momentum of this deck is, I think, one of its biggest weaknesses. Aside from Eldrazi, we also play a bunch of Hydras like Mistcutter Hydra, Hydroid Krasis, Vastwood Hydra, Voracious Hydra, Savageborn Hydra. All of these turn into valuable creatures because they have an X in their cost. And the more counters on Animar, if you, for example, have the combo with Ancestral Statue, these Hydras could also be infinitely strong. And Savageborn has Double Strike. Vastwood has the ability to distribute counters onto your other creatures when it dies. Voracious Hydra, you can double the amount of counters on it. So, really, there is sort of this sub theme of Hydras. With this deck, an important factor as well is the ability to manipulate +1/+1 counters. Some creatures or some cards in this deck give you certain abilities for +1/+1 counters, like Herald of Secret Streams. Any creatures with +1/+1 counters can't be blocked. That's obviously very good if you're going for commander damage with Animar. Or with a Hydra or any creature that accumulates +1/+1 counters. Pride Malkin puts a +1/+1 counter somewhere. Forgotten Ancient puts +1/+1 counters that accumulate whenever a player casts a spell. You can then move them onto other creatures, so you can move them onto Animar or any creature you want, really. Fungal Behemoth accumulates counters. And then we have Hardened Scales and Doubling Season, which increase the amount of counters that you put on your creatures. Tribute to the World Tree, a newer card. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card if its power is 3 or greater. Otherwise, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. That means when we cast Animar and this card is on the field, you immediately get 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Check out the full deck. I'm going to post the link in the description. Like and subscribe for more content.